Princess Gay. I'm your host Connie, and today we are here with my blind reaction to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original. Because this is one of those series of movies that I think I've seen like in passing, I guess is the best way to put it. This is a donation reward, by the way, for Sweet Venom. But I believe I've seen like part of one of these movies, like a very small portion I actually watched actively, if at all. No, not even really actively. Basically the idea is I think my dad had it on one time while I was like not really paying attention. I was like playing a game or on a computer or something. And this was years and years and years and years ago. Probably, I would say probably when I was still down in Georgia, which would have been over a decade ago. Because I left Georgia in fall of 2011 after graduating high school. And I was only down there for a couple years, mind you. But so it would have been between 2009 and 2011. Because that's the time frame I was down there. But again, I would have like seen it like just because I was in the room and only vaguely, like out of the corner of my eye while I was doing my own thing. I've never actually watched any of these movies on my own, and I've only seen clips randomly here and there through YouTube videos and stuff. Like, I've seen the clip where, like, Leatherface is swinging the chainsaw above his head and everything, kind of an iconic shot. Stuff like that. But I've never actually seen one of these movies. I assume it's basically just a standard slasher film, like, of the era. Just, you have Leatherface as the killer, you probably have some dumb teens and whatnot, coming to his neck of the woods or mountain or wherever the fuck he lives. I don't know. I don't really know. That's the thing. Leatherface, I believe, was in MK11, Mortal Kombat 11, as well as one of the guest characters, I think. I think it was 11. Because I think 10 only had Freddy Krueger, but 11 had a bunch of horror characters in it. Like, there was the Xenomorph from Aliens, there was the Predator, a bunch of them were there. Jason Voorhees. I think Leatherface was one of them. But yeah, I just don't know exactly what to expect going into this outside of just the standard old slasher film kind of stuff. This movie did come out in the 70s. So it's going to be interesting to see like the difference in how these characters act and everything compared to now, as it usually is with any kind of movie this old and whatnot. I'm curious, you know? I have kind of a mixed response to a lot of these older horror films. Some of them I like, some of them I don't. It just depends on the movie. I feel though that there's a lot of people, and I'm just going to be honest here. I feel there's a lot of people who will love on these films no matter what, just because of their age and the fact that they kick-started these genres and subgenres of horror, and only view it like with the kind of like nostalgia glasses that, let's be honest, blinds you to the actual flaws of a lot of these older movies. Because a lot of these older movies, even if you enjoy them, you honestly have to admit they have a lot of flaws. They have a lot of things that just don't work, especially nowadays. A lot of things that were very outdated even when they came out, honestly. and a lot of things that just don't age well. Plus, sometimes the writing and character work just isn't that good, honestly. Now, there's always exceptions, but it's subjective either way. So if you like it, that's perfectly fine. I'm not saying you can't or whatnot. I'm just saying, like, don't just view one of these older movies and view it as like this masterpiece of horror just because of its age and its influence on the genre. You can acknowledge something influenced the genre and acknowledge that looking back on it, it's not actually that good. At the time, maybe it was a lot better because there wasn't much to compare it to at the time. But you look back nowadays and you realize that, yeah, it's really not that good. And that can just be the case. That's been the case with many movies for me. There's been a lot of movies, even non-horror movies, where I've looked back on them and it's like, this is not as good as I remember. But that's because of a lot of different factors, evolving tastes, but also just the fact that I've been able to see more since then, and I've come to realize that those movies aren't that great. And there may be some of them where I still have a soft spot for them, sure. But I acknowledge their flaws. And I believe that any true fan of cinema, no matter what genre, would rightly acknowledge any flaws that they find with any movie. And I find that it is actually more insulting to not acknowledge flaws. Because how do you expect directors and writers and actors to get better if you don't acknowledge that they had flaws? That they need to improve? So, I don't know what I'm going to think about this looking at it from the perspective of someone who, is living and watching this for the first time in 2023. And who has seen a lot of horror films nowadays that put a lot of the classic stuff to shame. In my opinion, mind you. I don't know how I'm going to look at this, but I'm hoping that I can enjoy it nonetheless, because there's a lot of these old movies that I can just at least enjoy, even if they're not the best made. I get a kick out of them, I don't expect every older movie to be on the level of something like 12 Angry Men, which, I mean, a couple decades older than this movie, but still. Not everything's going to be that damn good for its time that even stands up to this day. 12 Angry Men is honestly an anomaly in that regard. I mean, it's not my favorite movie of all time for no reason. But outside of all of that, I'm going to give this a fair shot like I do with everything and hope for the best. Hell, maybe it might end up surprising me or even actually impressing me. I hope so. I will say, one last thing before we begin. Leatherface never seemed as big of a classic horror movie villain as a lot of the others. Like, even in the most, like, in the biggest horror movie circles I've seen, like, he never gets the same notoriety that the likes of Freddy, Jason, Michael, even Ghostface gets. It's just never on the same level. In fact, I would almost put him on more of a level with the Creeper from Jeepers Creepers. Which it's like, yeah, there's a very dedicated fan base to these characters, to these horror movie villains, but they're not quite legendary status. You know what I mean? I feel like I just don't see people talk about Leatherface in the same way as these others. And I don't know if that's just a writing thing, a character thing, or if it's just some other reason. But I did want to bring that up real quick. Now, this movie is also very short. It's only like an hour, 20 minutes long, and I think that's basically with credits, so that's really short. But it was an independent film. So I guess not too out of the question there. But I'm excited to see what we got in store here with this film. So let us get this going. When the screen fades to black, pause this redirect and go to the description below. Follow the link to the reaction, and after you watch it, come back here to the redirect and resume play. Because after it fades to black and then fades back in, everything from that point forward will be my afterthoughts and will contain spoilers to the movie. So, that being said, thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you at the reaction. And we are back, and we'll begin with spoilers in 3, 2, 1, now. So I looked at some of the reviews for this, and I'm confused. Because, and mind you, these are reviews that were, I guess, that came out upon its release. I guess, maybe. But either way, Linda Gross of the Los Angeles Times called it despicable and described Henkel and Hooper as more concerned with creating a realistic atmosphere than with its plastic script. Roger Ebert, the legendary critic of the Chicago Sun-Times, said it was as violent and gruesome and blood-soaked as the title promises. No, it wasn't. It very actively wasn't. Yet praised its acting and technical execution. One person. Out of 5 victims in this movie, outside of, the hitchhiker guy, Leatherface's brother, who was killed at the end when run over by the, truck. Outside of him, out of our 5 main victims, one of them was killed by a chainsaw. Literally one of them. And it was Franklin. The handicapped character who can't even really get away on his own. Like, the first guy was killed by a hammer. The second, the first girl who was killed, she was attacked and hung on a meat hook, but eventually left in the freezer where presumably she died of, freezing to death. And the other guy, I think he was just hit with a hammer too. Let me see here. Yeah, Kirk was hit with the hammer. Pam was hung on the meat hook. Kirk's body was dismembered by the chainsaw, but he was already dead at that point. Jerry is killed with a hammer. Jerry is the other guy. Franklin is the only one who is killed with the chainsaw, and then the last girl, Sally, escapes. So it's like, literally only one person was killed with the chainsaw. The chainsaw was used for a couple chase sequences, but calling this a chainsaw massacre, 1, 5 people does not make a massacre. 2, only one person was killed with the chainsaw. Also, this was not that bloody and gruesome. It really wasn't. I have seen a lot worse, even older movies that are a lot worse than this. Honestly, obviously this came before like Nightmare on Elm Street and stuff, but those movies are worse. Like, Friday the 13th is worse. Halloween is worse. Like, maybe at the exact year this came out, this was notably upsetting and everything. And again, I mentioned this in the pre-thoughts. Looking at this from the view of someone in 2023, seeing this for the first time, someone who has seen a lot of horror movies, a lot of gruesome and gory horror movies, this is nothing. It wasn't scary. It wasn't, like, upsetting. It wasn't gruesome. Honestly, it was a little underwhelming. Like, Leatherface was probably the freakiest part of it, but I actually think that having the gas station guy and the hitchhiker connected with him actually made him less scary. Having it be like this family of cannibals made it less scary. I think it would have been scarier if there was no explanation. If the guy at the gas station was just a bit creepy, the hitchhiker was just some freaking psycho weirdo they came upon, and Leatherface was his own thing, just completely separate, just this psycho waving around a hammer and a chainsaw with no explanation. I think that would have been a lot scarier. The pacing of this was also like really weird because it was really slow until Leatherface was first revealed, and then it just bulleted out of nowhere. It's like everybody's dying within like 5-10 minutes of each other. It's like it's so quick after Leatherface is revealed. Obviously, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you get the point. It just bullets because it has a short runtime. So instead of building up the tension, instead of like really setting a lot up, they have to kind of like burst everything out at the end. I mean, and I'm not saying there wasn't any setup, because again, we find out the hitchhiker is connected, that he's Leatherface's brother. All of that was set up. The symbol on the van and everything. The old guy at the gas station was clearly a creepo, but it's like it didn't like really feel like setup because of the way it was handled. And on top of that, the budget of this movie, like, the budget of this had to be like a bag of potato chips. Like, it was so fucking low budget, it's not funny. I think that's why they did so many cuts, so many sharp cuts, and like dramatic zoom-ins, and like points where they would like focus on a character like screaming, and it'd like zoom into her eye from this angle, go from this angle, zoom in like a lower angle over here. It's like I feel like they did that just because they had so little budget. They had to try and like ramp up the frights. They had to ramp up the scares to try and make it a little more tense, a little more intense, a little more frightening. It did not work. It just felt weird and off and out of place. There's also that part at the ending I was mentioning during the reaction where it's like, why the hell did this trucker get out of the other side of the truck? Why did Sally and this trucker get out the other side of the truck? His chainsaw was doing nothing to the door of that truck. Leatherface's chainsaw. If they had driven away, they would have been fine. And mind you, both seemingly escaped. The trucker just kind of ran off, and she ended up hitching a ride in another truck, this time just a pickup. But it's like they would have escaped just fine. Why did they not continue on? I don't understand. Like, running over the hitchhiker guy, like, that wouldn't have made it so that the truck couldn't continue moving. That wouldn't have done anything, let's be honest. Like, they could have kept going. I mean, the trucker did one thing right, like throwing the wrench or whatever that was at Leatherface, causing him to, fall and eventually drop the chainsaw on his leg and everything. Like, that helped, of course. But it's like, in all, what was the point of that? Why would you have the trucker not just drive them away? I don't understand. It felt like needless added tension at the end. And it's like, there was that weird, like, corpse art shit that we found out the brother had done. And it's just like, Kay? what are we supposed to think about that? It just felt like an added thing that just wasn't needed. It felt like out of nowhere and completely pointless to the rest of the story. I feel like if this movie had had 20 minutes more, they could have done a lot better too with the pacing not just suddenly taking a sharp jump in speed. The deaths should have been a lot further apart. There should have been more setup and tension to them. I I mean, this movie is clearly like super influential on the horror genre and especially slasher films and whatnot. But honestly, it is definitely one of those cases, like I mentioned in the pre-thoughts, where you look back on it and it's like, this isn't really that good. From a modern point of view, again, from the point of view of someone watching it in the year this came out, which was what, 74? I think I saw. Let me see here. 74, yes. From the point of view of someone watching this in 74, if you have like nothing else to really compare this to at the time, to really like see as like different or better paced or timed or whatever, like yeah, at that time maybe you could see this as being good. But again, looking back on it, it's clear that in more ways than one, it just didn't age well. It doesn't keep up with what horror has become in the current day. It feels very just boring, honestly, comparatively. And don't get me wrong, this isn't the worst horror movie I've seen by any means. It's not the worst one in terms of pacing and in terms of feeling outdated at this point. I've seen worse. But when these reviews and everything and people are saying like this is like such an iconic film and it's so gruesome and horrific and stuff, it's like I don't know, maybe I expected more, and maybe the sequels will do more. Because this was apparently an independent film, and it shows. And I'm wondering if maybe because of how well this did, maybe it had like the same thing that happened with Terminator. If you didn't know, Terminator was also an independent film, but it did so well that it got bigger budget and everything, and was allowed to become a much bigger deal after the first one. I'm kind of hoping that the second one and onward start to get better in terms of pacing, scares, gruesomeness, just all of this. Like it's really really not living up to its title like Roger Ebert seemed to think. Again, maybe at the time it did, but only like in that kind of context. But like I said, it's not like terrible or anything, it's just disappointing. But tell me in the comments below, what did you think of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre? And obviously no spoilers for any future entries. For now though, I'm Connie and I'm signing off. See y'all next time.